Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Montana town. While her classmates dreamed of prom dresses and college parties, she spent hours at the local military surplus store, studying tactical manuals and memorizing military protocols. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had filled her childhood with stories of courage, brotherhood, and service to country. When he died in a car accident during her senior year of high school, Sarah felt like she had lost her compass in life. The funeral was packed with veterans who had served alongside her father. They spoke of his bravery, his leadership, and how he had saved lives in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Sarah watched these weathered men cry as they folded the American flag and handed it to her mother. That night, staring at the flag on her bedroom dresser, Sarah made a decision that would change her life forever. She would become a Navy SEAL. The problem was that women were not allowed in SEAL teams in 2010. Sarah knew this, but she also knew that rules could be bent, especially in small recruiting stations where paperwork sometimes got mixed up. She had always been tall for a woman, with broad shoulders from years of swimming and rock climbing. Her voice was naturally deep, and she could easily pass for a young man if she cut her hair and dressed the right way. Sarah spent the next 6 months preparing. She studied every SEAL training manual she could find online. She learned military jargon, memorized chain of command structures, and practiced walking and talking like the soldiers she had observed at her father's funeral. She worked out 6 hours a day, building muscle mass and endurance. She even practiced urinating standing up and binding her chest to hide her feminine features. The day she walked into the Navy recruitment office in Billings, Sarah had transformed herself completely. She wore loose-fitting clothes, had cropped her dark hair into a military-style cut, and had practiced lowering her voice for weeks. She told the recruiter her name was Sam Martinez, and that she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps by becoming a SEAL. Petty Officer Johnson, the recruiter, was impressed by this young person's dedication and knowledge. Sam answered every question correctly, demonstrated impressive physical fitness, and showed an understanding of military life that most recruits lacked. Johnson fast-tracked the paperwork, eager to meet his monthly recruitment quota with such a promising candidate. Basic training at Great Lakes Naval Station was the hardest thing Sarah had ever done, but not for the reasons she expected. The physical challenges were manageable. She had trained her body well, and she could keep up with most of the men in her division. The real challenge was maintaining her disguise every single day. Sarah had to shower quickly when others weren't around, sleep in positions that hid her body's shape, and constantly monitor her voice and mannerisms. She made friends with her bunkmates, but always kept them at arm's length. When they talked about girls back home, Sarah nodded and made up stories about fictional girlfriends. When they went to the bathroom together, she always found excuses to go separately. The most terrifying moment came during the 3rd week of training. A fellow recruit named Danny started getting suspicious about Sam's secretive behavior. He began watching Sarah more closely, asking pointed questions about her past, and even following her to the bathroom. Sarah realized she was one discovery away from having her entire plan unravel. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Around her, 20 other recruits snored peacefully, unaware that a woman was sleeping among them. Sarah thought about her father and the promise she had made at his grave. She thought about the flag folded in her mother's closet and the veterans who had cried at the funeral. She decided to push forward. Sarah became even more careful after Danny's suspicions. She volunteered for extra duties that would keep her away from the group during personal time. She studied harder, trained longer, and made herself indispensable to her drill instructors. Her performance was so exceptional that Danny's questions began to seem like jealousy rather than legitimate concerns. During the 6th week of training, Sarah's division was scheduled for their first major field exercise. They would spend 5 days in simulated combat conditions, living in tents, eating military rations, and practicing everything they had learned. Sarah saw this as both an opportunity and a major risk. 5 days of close quarters living would make it nearly impossible to maintain her secret. The night before the exercise, Sarah called her mother from a payphone outside the base exchange. She couldn't tell her mother the truth about what she was doing, so she made up a story about working at a summer camp. Her mother sounded proud but worried, telling Sarah to be careful and to call home more often. As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized she was living in two different worlds. In one world, she was Sam Martinez, a promising Navy recruit on track to become a SEAL. In the other world, she was Sarah Martinez, a young woman lying to everyone she cared about in pursuit of an impossible dream. The field exercise began before dawn with drill instructors screaming and smoke grenades exploding. Sarah grabbed her gear and fell in line with her division, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. For the next 5 days, she would have to be perfect. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and her secret would be exposed. As they marched toward the training area, Sarah caught Danny watching her again. This time, however, she saw something different in his expression. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was respect. Her hard work and dedication had earned the acceptance of her peers, even the ones who had initially doubted her. Sarah smiled slightly as they disappeared into the woods. Maybe her impossible dream wasn't so impossible after all. Maybe she really could become the SEAL her father had always wanted to be. Maybe she could honor his memory by serving her country with the same courage and dedication he had shown in Vietnam. She had no idea that in just a few weeks, her carefully constructed world would come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. She also had no idea that when it did, she would have the chance to prove that being a hero had nothing to do with the uniform you wore or the gender you were born with. For now, though, Sarah Martinez was exactly where she wanted to be, marching toward her destiny with her head held high and her father's memory guiding every step. The field exercise went better than Sarah could have hoped. Her division spent 5 days practicing urban warfare tactics, learning to work as a team under pressure, and proving they had what it took to serve in the Navy. Sarah's performance was outstanding. She volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, showed natural leadership skills, and earned the respect of both her peers and instructors. On the final night of the exercise, the recruits were allowed to relax around a campfire. They shared stories about home, talked about their future assignments, and bonded in the way that only people who have suffered together can bond. Sarah found herself genuinely caring about these men who had become her brothers in arms. Danny sat down next to her as the fire began to die down. For a moment, Sarah tensed, wondering if he was going to confront her about his suspicions. Instead, Danny put his hand on her shoulder and said something that nearly broke her heart. "Sam, I want to apologize for giving you such a hard time these past few weeks," Danny said quietly. "I thought maybe you were hiding something. But I realize now that some people are just more private than others. You're one of the best recruits in our division, and I'm proud to serve alongside you." Sarah looked into the dying embers of the campfire and nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Danny's acceptance meant more to her than he would ever know, but it also made her feel terrible about the lies she was living. These men trusted her with their lives, and she was deceiving them every single day. After basic training, Sarah was accepted into the Navy SEAL preparatory program. This was the first step toward her ultimate goal, and she threw herself into the training with everything she had. The physical demands were brutal, but Sarah had prepared well. She could swim for hours without tiring, run miles in full gear, and complete obstacle courses that broke stronger men. The real challenge came during the psychological evaluations and background checks. Sarah had created a false identity so carefully that it passed most routine inspections, but SEAL training required a deeper level of scrutiny. Military investigators began looking into Sam Martinez's background, trying to verify details about his childhood, education, and family history. Sarah had anticipated this problem and spent months creating a paper trail for her fake identity. She had hacked into school records, created false social media accounts, and even paid a computer expert to plant evidence of Sam Martinez's existence in various databases. It was risky and illegal, but Sarah was committed to her goal. For 6 months, Sarah excelled in SEAL preparatory training. She learned advanced weapons handling, practiced parachute jumps, and studied foreign languages. Her instructors praised her dedication and natural aptitude for special operations work. Several senior SEALs mentioned that Sam Martinez had the potential to become one of the elite warriors they were looking for. Sarah's closest call came during a medical examination in her 7th month of training. The Navy doctor conducting the physical was more thorough than usual, and Sarah worried that her carefully hidden feminine features might be discovered. She had been taking testosterone supplements to deepen her voice and build muscle mass, but she knew that a detailed medical exam could expose her secret. The doctor noticed some irregularities in Sarah's blood work and ordered additional tests. Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights wondering if her adventure was about to end in disgrace. When the results came back, the doctor attributed the anomalies to stress and overtraining, recommending that Sam take a few days of rest. Sarah used those days to reassess her situation. She had come further than she had ever imagined possible, but she was also living on borrowed time. Every day brought new risks of discovery, and she was beginning to understand that even if she somehow made it through SEAL training, she would spend the rest of her military career living a lie. During her 10th month of training, Sarah's unit was preparing for their final evaluation exercise. This would determine who would advance to actual SEAL training and who would be transferred to other Navy positions. Sarah had worked harder than anyone to reach this point, and she was determined to succeed. The exercise took place in the mountains of Colorado during winter conditions. Sarah's unit would spend 2 weeks practicing extreme weather survival, high-altitude operations, and small unit tactics. The instructors made it clear that this was a make-or-break moment for everyone involved. On the 3rd day of the exercise, Sarah's team was conducting a reconnaissance mission when they received an emergency radio call. A civilian convoy carrying medical supplies to a remote mountain community had become trapped in an unexpected blizzard. The local sheriff's department had requested military assistance, and Sarah's unit was the closest available resource. The mission parameters changed immediately. This was no longer a training exercise. This was a real-world emergency where civilian lives hung in the balance. Sarah felt her training and instincts take over as her team leader briefed them on the situation. The convoy consisted of 3 vehicles carrying a doctor, 2 nurses, and several volunteer drivers. They had been attempting to deliver emergency medical supplies to a small town that had been cut off by heavy snowfall for over a week. The convoy had taken a back road to avoid highway closures, but had become stuck when the blizzard intensified. Radio contact with the convoy was sporadic, but the last transmission indicated that one of the vehicles had slid off the road and overturned. There were injuries, and the group was running low on fuel for their heaters. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and weather forecasters predicted the blizzard would continue for at least another 12 hours. Sarah's unit leader, Sergeant Rodriguez, explained that they would have to hike 15 miles through mountain terrain in whiteout conditions to reach the convoy. The mission would require night navigation, extreme weather survival skills, and the ability to provide medical assistance to injured civilians. As the team prepared their gear, Sarah felt a familiar mixture of fear and excitement. This was what she had trained for. This was her chance to save lives and serve her country just like her father had done in Vietnam. She checked her equipment one final time and followed her team into the howling wind and snow. The hike to the convoy location was the most challenging thing Sarah had ever done. Visibility was near zero, and the wind was strong enough to knock a person off their feet. The team had to rope themselves together to avoid getting separated, and they took turns breaking trail through waist-deep snow. Several times during the journey, Sarah found herself taking the lead. Her natural navigation skills and physical endurance kept the team moving when others began to falter. She encouraged her teammates when they wanted to rest, shared her emergency food when others ran low on energy, and never complained about the brutal conditions. After 8 hours of hiking, the team finally spotted lights in the distance. The convoy was exactly where the GPS coordinates had indicated, but the situation was worse than anyone had anticipated. 2 vehicles were completely buried in snow, and the third was barely visible. There was no sign of movement from any of the trapped vehicles. Sarah's heart sank as she realized they might be too late to save anyone. The convoy had been trapped for over 18 hours, and the temperature had dropped to nearly 20 degrees below zero. Even with heaters running, the occupants would be suffering from hypothermia and possibly worse. Sergeant Rodriguez called for a team meeting to plan their approach. They needed to dig out the vehicles, assess the medical condition of the trapped civilians, and establish a safe evacuation plan. The work would be dangerous and exhausting, and there was no guarantee that everyone would survive. Sarah volunteered to take point on the rescue operation. Something deep inside her had awakened during the long hike through the blizzard. This wasn't about proving herself as a fake male SEAL anymore. This was about using every skill she had learned to save innocent people who were counting on them. As she moved toward the first buried vehicle, Sarah had no idea that in just a few hours, her secret would be exposed in the most dramatic way possible. She also had no idea that the way she handled this crisis would define not just her own future, but the future of women in special operations for years to come. Sarah plunged her shovel into the snow covering the first vehicle, working with desperate efficiency. Each scoop revealed more of the buried SUV, and she could hear faint tapping sounds from inside. Someone was alive and trying to communicate. "I hear them," Sarah called to her teammates over the howling wind. "There are survivors in here." The team formed a human chain, passing buckets of snow away from the vehicles while Sarah and two others dug frantically around the doors. After 20 minutes of backbreaking work, they cleared enough snow to access the driver's side door of the first SUV. Sarah yanked the door open and was hit by a blast of frigid air from inside the vehicle. The heater had stopped working hours ago, and 3 people were huddled together under emergency blankets. They were conscious but showing clear signs of hypothermia, confusion, slurred speech, and violent shivering. "We're U.S. Navy," Sarah announced, helping the first person out of the vehicle. "We're here to get you out of this." The rescued civilian was Dr. Patricia Chun, a 45-year-old emergency room physician who had volunteered to deliver medical supplies to the isolated mountain community. Despite her own condition, Dr. Chun immediately began giving Sarah information about the other trapped people. "The overturned vehicle has 2 people inside," Dr. Chun said through chattering teeth. "One of them, Maria, is pregnant. She was unconscious when we lost radio contact with them 3 hours ago. The third vehicle has 4 people, including an elderly man with diabetes who was already having medical issues before we got trapped." Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. They weren't just dealing with hypothermia anymore. They had a pregnant woman who might be injured, an elderly diabetic patient, and several other people in various stages of cold-related illness. The situation was becoming more complex by the minute. Sergeant Rodriguez assigned team members to each vehicle while Sarah coordinated the overall rescue effort. Her natural leadership abilities were becoming obvious to everyone, even in the extreme conditions. She moved between the vehicles, assessing each situation and making critical decisions about medical priorities and evacuation procedures. The overturned vehicle presented the biggest challenge. It had slid off the road and rolled onto its side in a deep snowdrift. The team could hear voices from inside, but the doors were pinned shut by the vehicle's position and the weight of the snow. "We need to dig around the back," Sarah directed. "If we can clear the rear hatch, we might be able to get them out that way." As the team worked to excavate the overturned vehicle, Sarah noticed that one of her teammates, Private Johnson, was beginning to show signs of exhaustion and cold injury. His movements were becoming sluggish, and he was having trouble following directions. "Johnson, take a break," Sarah ordered. "Get inside one of the cleared vehicles and warm up." "Rodriguez, we need to rotate people before we lose team members to the cold." Sergeant Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Sarah was thinking tactically, considering not just the civilians they were rescuing, but also the welfare of their own team. This kind of situational awareness was exactly what SEAL instructors looked for in potential special operations personnel. After another hour of digging, the team finally cleared access to the rear of the overturned vehicle. Sarah was the first person through the opening, crawling into the cramped, upside-down interior to assess the trapped occupants. Maria Gonzalez, the pregnant woman Dr. Chun had mentioned, was semi-conscious and had a nasty cut on her forehead from the crash. Her companion, a volunteer driver named Tom Wilson, was awake but trapped under some shifted cargo. Both were suffering from hypothermia, but their injuries were manageable if they could get proper medical attention. "Maria, can you hear me?" Sarah asked, checking the woman's pulse and looking for signs of serious injury. "We're going to get you out of here." Maria opened her eyes and grabbed Sarah's arm weakly. "My baby," she whispered. "Please, is my baby okay?" Sarah had received basic medical training as part of her SEAL preparation, but she wasn't qualified to assess the condition of an unborn child. She made the decision to prioritize getting Maria out of the vehicle so Dr. Chun could examine her properly. "We're going to move you very carefully," Sarah explained to both trapped civilians. "Tom, I need you to stay calm while we get Maria out first. Then, we'll come back for you." The extraction process was delicate and dangerous. The vehicle was unstable, and any sudden movement could cause it to shift further or collapse completely. Sarah had to crawl partially into the wreckage, secure Maria with rescue straps, and then coordinate with her teammates to pull her out through the rear opening. As they lifted Maria from the overturned vehicle, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before in her military training. This wasn't about proving herself or following orders anymore. This was about using her strength and skills to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. This was what her father had meant when he talked about service and sacrifice. Dr. Chin immediately began examining Maria while the team worked to extract Tom Wilson. The pregnant woman was stable, but she needed to get to a hospital for proper evaluation. Her baby's condition was impossible to determine in field conditions. The third vehicle contained 4 people in various stages of cold-related illness. The elderly diabetic patient, Harold Murphy, was in the most serious condition. His blood sugar was dangerously low, and he was becoming increasingly disoriented. "We need to get him glucose immediately," Dr. Chin told Sarah after examining Mr. Murphy. "If we can't stabilize his blood sugar, he could go into a coma." Sarah searched through the team's emergency medical supplies and found glucose tablets and an emergency injection kit. She helped Dr. Chin administer treatment while the rest of the team continued working to evacuate the other civilians. The rescue operation took nearly 4 hours to complete. By the time all 9 civilians were extracted from the vehicles, the blizzard was beginning to subside, but the temperature had dropped even further. Several of the rescued people needed immediate medical attention, and the team's evacuation plan was complicated by the extreme weather and difficult terrain. Sarah made the decision to establish a temporary shelter using emergency tarps and the cleared vehicles. They could provide basic medical care and wait for the weather to improve before attempting to evacuate the entire group. It was a risk, but trying to move seriously injured and hypothermic people 15 miles through mountain terrain in a blizzard would be even more dangerous. As she helped set up the shelter, Sarah noticed that her teammates were looking at her differently. Throughout the rescue operation, she had naturally taken charge of critical decisions, coordinated multiple teams, and shown the kind of leadership that typically took years to develop. Sergeant Rodriguez had essentially allowed her to run the entire operation, which was unusual for someone at her level of training. The temporary shelter provided enough protection from the wind for Dr. Chun to conduct more thorough medical examinations. Maria's pregnancy appeared to be stable, Harold's blood sugar was responding to treatment, and the other civilians were recovering from hypothermia. Everyone would need hospital evaluation, but the immediate crisis was under control. As the long night continued, Sarah found herself talking with Dr. Chun about the rescue operation. The doctor was impressed by the team's professionalism and efficiency, and she was particularly curious about the young sailor who had coordinated so much of the effort. "You handled this situation with remarkable maturity," Dr. Chin told Sarah as they shared hot coffee from a thermos. "How long have you been in the Navy?" Sarah gave her standard answer about training and preparation, but she could see that Dr. Chin was studying her more closely. There was something in the doctor's expression that made Sarah uncomfortable, as if Dr. Chun was seeing details that others had missed. "Have we met before?" Dr. Chun asked suddenly. "There's something familiar about you, but I can't place where I might have seen you." Sarah's heart began racing. She hadn't considered the possibility that one of the people she was rescuing might recognize her from her previous life. She mumbled something about having a common face and tried to change the subject, but she could feel Dr. Chin's curious gaze following her as she moved around the shelter. As dawn began to break, the weather finally started clearing enough for a helicopter evacuation. Sarah contacted their base using emergency radio equipment and provided coordinates for the rescue site. Within 2 hours, military helicopters arrived to transport the injured civilians to hospitals in Denver. Sarah helped load the stretchers and said goodbye to the people she had worked so hard to save. Maria squeezed her hand and thanked her for saving both her life and her baby's life. Harold Murphy, now fully conscious and stable, insisted on shaking hands with every member of the rescue team. Dr. Chun was the last civilian to be loaded onto the helicopter. As the medical crew prepared her for transport, she called Sarah over for one final conversation. "I know who you are," Dr. Chun said quietly, looking directly into Sarah's eyes. "I treated your mother in the emergency room 2 years ago when she had that car accident. You sat in the waiting room for 8 hours, and we talked about your father's military service." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Her carefully constructed false identity was about to crumble, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Your name is Sarah Martinez," Dr. Chun continued, "and you're one of the most courageous people I've ever met. I don't know what you're doing here or why you're pretending to be someone else, but what you did tonight proves that heroism has nothing to do with the uniform you wear." As the helicopter lifted off into the morning sky, Sarah stood in the snow watching it disappear. Her secret was out, and in just a few hours, her entire world would change forever. The helicopter carrying Dr. Chun and the other rescued civilians disappeared into the cloudy morning sky, leaving Sarah standing in the snow with her heart pounding. She knew that her secret was out, and it was only a matter of time before the truth reached her commanding officers. The question was whether Dr. Chun would immediately report what she knew, or if Sarah would have a few hours to figure out her next move. Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the team for the long hike back to their base camp. Everyone was exhausted from the all-night rescue operation, but there was also a sense of pride and accomplishment among the group. They had saved 9 lives under extremely difficult conditions, and their performance had been flawless. As they packed their gear and prepared to leave the rescue site, several of Sarah's teammates congratulated her on her leadership during the crisis. Private Johnson, the soldier she had ordered to take a warming break, told her that her quick thinking had probably prevented him from becoming a casualty himself. "You've got real command potential, Martinez," Johnson said as they shouldered their heavy packs. "I've never seen someone take charge like that during their first real emergency." Sarah nodded and tried to smile, but her mind was racing with worry about what would happen when they returned to base. She had spent over a year building her false identity and working toward her goal of becoming a SEAL. Now, because she had done exactly what she was trained to do, save lives and serve her country, everything was about to come crashing down. The hike back to base took 6 hours through improving but still challenging weather conditions. Sarah used the time to think about her options. She could try to run before anyone discovered the truth, but that would make her a deserter and a fugitive. She could confess everything to Sergeant Rodriguez and hope for mercy, but that would still mean the end of her military career and possible criminal charges for falsifying her identity. By the time they reached base camp, Sarah had decided on a third option. She would continue as if nothing had happened and hope that Dr. Chun would keep her secret. It wasn't a great plan, but it was the only one that offered any possibility of continuing her military service. The team was debriefed immediately after their return. Senior officers wanted detailed reports about the rescue operation, the condition of the civilians, and the performance of the personnel involved. Sarah answered all questions professionally and accurately, but she could feel her anxiety building with each passing minute. After the formal debriefing, Sergeant Rodriguez asked Sarah to stay behind for a private conversation. This was the moment Sarah had been dreading. She stood at attention and prepared for the worst. "Martinez, I want you to know that your performance during this operation was exceptional," Rodriguez began. "You showed natural leadership abilities, excellent judgment under pressure, and the kind of initiative we look for in special operations personnel." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and guilt as she listened to the praise. She had earned this recognition through her own actions and abilities, but it was all built on a foundation of lies. "I'm recommending you for accelerated advancement in the SEAL program," Rodriguez continued. "You've proven that you have what it takes to serve in special operations, and I believe you could make significant contributions to our mission." Sarah thanked the sergeant and tried to look appropriately honored by the recommendation. Inside, she felt like she was falling apart. Everything she had worked for was within reach, but it was all about to be taken away by the truth. 3 days passed without any word from Dr. Chun or the hospital where the rescued civilians had been taken. Sarah began to hope that perhaps the doctor had decided to keep her secret, or that she had been too busy with her own medical treatment to contact military authorities. On the 4th day, Sarah was called to the base commander's office for what she was told would be a routine administrative meeting. As she walked across the base toward headquarters, Sarah knew that her time had finally run up. Dr. Chun had kept her word about recognizing Sarah's heroism, but she had also done her duty as a citizen. Colonel James Harrison was waiting in his office along with 2 other officers Sarah didn't recognize. One was a woman in Navy dress uniform with the insignia of a military investigator. The other was a civilian in a business suit who looked like a government lawyer. "Please have a seat, Martinez," Colonel Harrison said in a tone that suggested this was anything but a routine meeting. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention." Sarah sat down and tried to maintain her composure, but she could feel sweat beginning to form on her forehead despite the cool temperature in the office. This was the moment she had been preparing for mentally, but actually facing it was more terrifying than she had imagined. 3 days ago, you participated in a civilian rescue operation that saved 9 lives, the colonel continued. Your performance during that operation was exemplary, and you've been recommended for commendation. However, we've also received some disturbing information about your identity and background. The military investigator opened a thick file folder and pulled out several documents. Sarah could see copies of her original enlistment papers, background check reports, and what appeared to be hospital records. Dr. Patricia Chun, one of the civilians you helped rescue, contacted our office yesterday, the investigator said. She provided information suggesting that your true identity is Sarah Martinez, a 21-year-old woman from Montana, and that you have been serving in the Navy under false pretenses. Sarah felt like the room was spinning. This was it. Her military career was over, and she was probably facing serious criminal charges. She thought about her father's grave and the promise she had made to honor his memory through military service. She had come so close to achieving her goal, only to have it destroyed by the very rescue operation that proved she belonged in special operations. "We've conducted our own investigation based on Dr. Chen's information," the civilian lawyer said. "Our findings confirm that you enlisted using fraudulent identity documents and have been serving as a male when your actual legal identity is female." Sarah looked down at her hands and tried to think of something to say. No explanation or excuse would make any difference now. She had broken multiple laws and military regulations, and there was no way to undo what she had done. However, Colonel Harrison said, and the word made Sarah look up in surprise, "Dr. Chen also provided us with a detailed account of your actions during the rescue operation. According to her report, and the reports of your teammates, you demonstrated exceptional leadership, tactical thinking, and personal courage under extremely difficult conditions." Sarah didn't understand where this conversation was heading. She had expected to be arrested immediately, not praised for her performance while being exposed as a fraud. "The fact is, Martinez, and I'll continue calling you that since it's the name you've earned the right to use, you've proven yourself to be exactly the kind of person the Navy needs in special operations," the colonel continued. "Your gender is irrelevant to your ability to serve your country with distinction." The military investigator pulled out another set of documents. As of 6 months ago, the military's policy regarding women in special operations has been under review. Your case has accelerated that review process, and senior leadership has decided to use your situation as a test case for full integration. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Instead of being court-martialed and imprisoned, she was apparently being offered the chance to continue serving openly as a woman. "There will be conditions," the civilian lawyer explained. "You'll need to undergo a complete legal identity review, submit to additional psychological evaluation, and accept close monitoring during a probationary period. You'll also need to testify before congressional committees about your experiences and help develop new policies for female integration in special operations." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. After more than a year of living in fear that her secret would be discovered, she was being offered the chance to serve her country openly and honestly. The question is whether you're willing to accept these conditions and continue your military service as yourself rather than as the person you've been pretending to be, Colonel Harrison said. Sarah thought about her father and the promise she had made at his grave. She thought about the 9 people she had helped rescue in the blizzard and how good it had felt to use her skills and training to save lives. She thought about the teammates who had praised her leadership and the commanding officers who believed in her abilities. "Yes, sir," Sarah said, her voice strong and clear for the first time in over a year. "I want to continue serving my country, and I want to help other women have the same opportunity." The colonel smiled and stood up to shake her hand. "Welcome to the Navy, Sarah Martinez. Your real Navy career starts now." As Sarah walked out of the headquarters building, she felt like a tremendous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was no longer living a lie, and she no longer had to hide who she really was. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since her father's death, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months after her identity was revealed, Sarah Martinez stood before a packed congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C. The bright camera lights and rows of serious-faced politicians were intimidating, but Sarah had faced much worse challenges than this. She adjusted the microphone in front of her and prepared to tell her story to the world. The committee chairman, Senator Robert Matthews, called the hearing to order and introduced Sarah as the first witness in hearings about women in special operations roles. Sarah wore her Navy dress uniform with the new ribbons she had earned, including a commendation medal for the blizzard rescue operation that had changed her life. "Ms. Martinez," Senator Matthews began, "please tell this committee about your decision to enlist in the Navy under false identity and your subsequent service in special operations training." Sarah had practiced this testimony many times, but speaking publicly about her deception was still difficult. She explained her father's influence on her life, her desire to serve her country in combat roles, and her decision to disguise herself as a man to pursue opportunities that were not available to women at the time. "I knew what I was doing was illegal," Sarah testified, "but I also knew that I had the skills and dedication necessary to serve in special operations, and I was willing to take any risk to prove that. My father taught me that service to country was the highest calling, and I believe that calling applied to me regardless of my gender." The questions from committee members were tough, but fair. Some senators expressed concern about the precedent of rewarding someone who had broken military regulations. Others focused on the practical challenges of integrating women into previously all-male special operations units. Senator Patricia Williams, the ranking minority member, asked the question that Sarah had been expecting. "Ms. Martinez, during your time serving under false identity, did you feel that you were deceiving your fellow service members who trusted you with their lives?" Sarah paused before answering, knowing that her response would be scrutinized by media outlets and military personnel around the world. "Senator, that was the most difficult part of my entire experience. The men I served alongside became my brothers, and lying to them was painful every single day. However, I want to emphasize that I never compromised their safety or the mission because of my deception. If anything, my awareness of the risks I was taking made me more committed to excellence in every aspect of my service." The hearing continued for 3 hours, with Sarah answering questions about everything from physical fitness standards to unit cohesion to her performance during the rescue operation. When it was over, Sarah felt emotionally drained, but proud that she had been able to tell her story honestly and completely. That evening, Sarah met with Dr. Patricia Chin for dinner at a quiet restaurant near Capitol Hill. The doctor had become an unexpected ally and friend, using her medical credentials to support Sarah's case for continued military service. Dr. Chun had testified earlier that day about Sarah's performance during the rescue operation and her opinion that gender was irrelevant to heroism and leadership ability. "How do you think it went today?" Dr. Chin asked as they shared a meal and reflected on the day's events. "Better than I expected," Sarah replied. "I was nervous about the questions, but I think I was able to explain my motivations and demonstrate that women can succeed in these roles if given the opportunity." Dr. Chin smiled and raised her water glass in a toast. Here's to breaking barriers and proving that courage doesn't have a gender. The congressional hearings continued for 2 weeks, with testimony from military experts, psychologists, and other service members. The committee also heard from some of the people Sarah had rescued during the blizzard operation, including Maria Gonzalez, who had given birth to a healthy baby girl 3 months after the rescue. Maria's testimony was particularly powerful. She described being trapped in the overturned vehicle, feeling her baby move inside her, and wondering if they would both die in the mountains. When Sarah had crawled into the wreckage to rescue her, Maria said she hadn't cared about the gender of her rescuer. She had only cared that someone was strong enough and brave enough to save her life. That young sailor risked everything to help people she had never met, Maria testified. She hiked through a blizzard for hours, worked all night in dangerous conditions, and made decisions that saved 9 lives. If that's not the kind of person we want in special operations, then I don't understand what we're looking for. The committee's final report, released 6 weeks after the hearings, recommended full integration of women into special operations training programs, with Sarah Martinez serving as the pilot candidate. The report praised her exceptional performance under the most challenging conditions and noted that her gender had no negative impact on unit effectiveness or mission success. Sarah was officially transferred to the Navy's first integrated SEAL training program, designed specifically to test whether women could meet the same standards as men in the most demanding military roles. The program was intense, with constant media attention and scrutiny from critics who believed women would lower standards or compromise unit effectiveness. The physical challenges were enormous, but Sarah had been preparing for them for years. She completed the infamous Hell Week training exercise, passed all swimming and diving tests, and demonstrated proficiency with every weapon system used by SEAL teams. More importantly, she earned the respect of her male classmates through her performance and dedication. The biggest challenge wasn't physical fitness or tactical skills. It was dealing with the constant pressure of being the first. Every mistake Sarah made was analyzed and criticized. Every success was scrutinized for signs that standards had been lowered. She carried the hopes and fears of thousands of women who wanted to serve in combat roles, and that responsibility was heavier than any physical burden. 8 months after beginning the integrated training program, Sarah graduated as the Navy's first female SEAL. The graduation ceremony was attended by senior military officials, members of Congress, and representatives from women's rights organizations. Sarah's mother flew in from Montana to watch her daughter achieve the goal that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. As Sarah received her SEAL Trident pin, she thought about her father and wondered if he would be proud of what she had accomplished. She had kept her promise to honor his memory through military service, but she had done it in a way he probably never could have imagined. After graduation, Sarah was assigned to a SEAL team conducting counterterrorism operations in the Middle East. Her first deployment proved that her gender was irrelevant to her effectiveness as a special operations warrior. She participated in dozens of missions, earning 2 Bronze Stars and the respect of her teammates and commanders. 3 years after the blizzard rescue that changed her life, Sarah received a letter from Dr. Patricia Chun. The doctor was now working with a nonprofit organization that provided medical care in disaster zones around the world. She had been following Sarah's military career and wanted to share some news. The letter explained that the mountain community where the medical convoy had been headed during the blizzard had named their new community center after Sarah. The building served as an emergency shelter and medical clinic, and a plaque by the front door read, "Martinez Community Center, in honor of those who risk everything to help others." Sarah sat in her barracks room reading the letter and thinking about the unexpected turns her life had taken. She had started out trying to become someone else in order to serve her country. Instead, she had discovered that being herself was enough. The young woman who had once been arrested for impersonating a SEAL had become a real SEAL through courage, determination, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for what she believed in. Her story had opened doors for thousands of other women who wanted to serve in combat roles, and she had proven that heroism truly had no gender. Sarah folded the letter and put it in the frame next to her father's photograph. Tomorrow she would deploy on another mission, serving her country as the person she had always been meant to be. Her father's promise was kept, but the story was far from over. Sarah Martinez, the first female Navy SEAL, was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.